comes to mind when you think of a medieval queen? A quiet woman locked away in a castle tower, spending her days embroidering and too afraid to look her husband in the eye. If that's the image you have, then you simply don't know the story of Eleanor of Aquitaine, a woman who became both Queen of France and Queen of England, a mother of 3 kings and 2 queens, the ancestor of the mighty Plantagenet dynasty, a queen who rebelled against her own husband, spent 15 years in captivity, lived to the age of 80, and even then was still leading armies and shaping the fate of kingdoms. So today, let's talk about one of the most remarkable women in medieval history. Leave a like and let's begin. If you ever watched movies about the Middle Ages as a child and dreamed of becoming a princess living in a castle, then be grateful that dream never came true. Because being born a princess in the Middle Ages was far less glamorous than fairy tales would have you believe, and Eleanor herself would have been the first to tell you that. Girls were valued so much less than boys that recording the exact date of a daughter's birth was often considered unimportant. That was the case with Eleanor. We don't know the exact day she was born, and we aren't even completely certain of the year. In fact, almost everything we know about her life has been painstakingly reconstructed by historians from records written about the men around her. From those scattered fragments, they estimate that Eleanor was born around 1124. She was named after her mother, whose name was Eleanor. To distinguish the daughter from the mother, people began calling her Alia Eleanor, meaning the other Eleanor. Over time, that evolved into the name Eleanor. Her father was William X, Duke of Aquitaine. At the time, Aquitaine was so vast, wealthy, and culturally sophisticated that even the King of France envied it. Compared to the flourishing cities of Aquitaine, Paris looked like a dull, uncultured backwater. At least that's certainly how it would seem to Eleanor when she eventually found herself there. As the heir of her father, Eleanor naturally became the most sought-after bride in Europe by the age of 13. But if you think that was an enviable position to be in, I'm afraid I have to disappoint you. In those days, being a wealthy heiress was often more dangerous than prestigious. No knights were waiting beneath your balcony with flowers in their hands. Instead, there was a very real risk of being kidnapped and forced into marriage by someone eager to claim your family's lands for himself. So when Eleanor's father began to sense that the end of his life was approaching, one of the first things he concerned himself with was finding a husband for his daughter. The man chosen for her was Louis, the son of the King of France, the future Louis VII. And so, on July the 25th, 1137, a 15-year-old duchess married a 17-year-old prince. Just 1 month later, they became Queen and King of France. But it would be hard to imagine 2 people less suited to one another. Eleanor was naturally vibrant, strong-willed, and full of energy. If there's one thing her life makes clear, it's that there was a fire burning inside her from the very beginning. Her husband, on the other hand, was her complete opposite. Louis had originally been the king's second son and only became heir to the throne after his older brother died following a riding accident. From childhood, he had been educated for a life in the church rather than on the throne. Stories later circulated that on his wedding night, the young groom seemed more interested in prayer than romance, and Eleanor herself was said to have remarked that she'd been given a monk for a husband rather than a king. Whether those stories were true or not, the marriage did eventually produce 2 daughters. In 1147, Louis set out on the Second Crusade to the Holy Land, and Eleanor persuaded him to allow her and her ladies to accompany the army. Legends later claimed that Eleanor rode into the crusade dressed like an Amazon warrior, leading troops on horseback. But the event that was supposed to become this greatest triumph of their union instead became the first step toward its collapse. Louis emerged from the crusade looking like an ineffective commander and a poor strategist, while Eleanor chose to side with her uncle Raymond on matters of military and political strategy, rather than with her husband. That disagreement sparked a flood of rumours, claiming that uncle and niece were far more than relatives, rumours that fueled the king's jealousy and deepened the growing rift between them. By the time the royal couple returned to France, they were reportedly travelling on separate ships and had all but stopped speaking to one another. Their marriage had deteriorated so badly that they decided to do something almost unthinkable for the 12th century. They sought an annulment, or, as we would call it today, a divorce. The official reason was that they were supposedly too closely related by blood. Technically, they were fourth cousins. But as we all know, that was hardly unusual among medieval royal families. In fact, Eleanor's next husband would be even more closely related to her than Louis was. So, while the official reason for the annulment was their shared bloodline, the real issue hanging in the air was the absence of the one thing a medieval royal marriage was expected to produce: a son. After the annulment, Eleanor regained control of her lands and enormous wealth. At last, she was free, or at least she should have been. As I mentioned earlier, Eleanor was far too valuable on the medieval marriage market to be left alone for long. What followed was nothing short of a hunt. Twice, powerful noblemen attempted to kidnap her and force her into marriage. The first was Theobald V of Blois, who tried to seize Eleanor while she was travelling through his territory. She managed to escape by slipping away and travelling downriver by boat. Soon afterward, Geoffrey of Anjou made a similar attempt, but Eleanor learned of the ambush in advance and changed her route before he could reach her. So yes, being a princess in the 12th century was every bit as dangerous as it sounds. Whether out of desperation, political calculation, or perhaps a genuine affection that had begun during an earlier meeting, Eleanor decided to take matters into her own hands. She sent messengers to an old acquaintance of hers, Henry, Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou, the son of Empress Matilda. And if you haven't seen my video about Matilda yet, you should definitely check it out. The message Eleanor sent was a simple one. Would he marry her? Henry was the heir to the English throne, 10 years younger than Eleanor and by all accounts quite handsome. Of course, it probably wasn't just romance that brought them together. Politics was very much part of the equation as well. By marrying Eleanor, Henry would gain control of Aquitaine, dramatically strengthening his position in the struggle for the English crown. And Eleanor, for her part, would once again become a queen, even if this time it was the Queen of England. So just 8 weeks after her annulment from Louis, the two were married. There was nothing particularly grand or royal about the ceremony. It lacked the splendour one might expect from a woman of Eleanor's status. Yet it would become one of the most significant marriages in medieval history, marking the beginning of the Plantagenet dynasty that would rule England for the next 3 centuries. When Louis learned of the marriage, he was absolutely furious. And honestly, I can understand why. Just imagine your ex getting remarried barely 2 months after your relationship ended. Almost immediately, Louis began preparing for war. He invaded Normandy, one of Henry's territories, setting in motion a conflict between the French crown and the Plantagenets that would continue in one form or another for nearly 50 years. As it turned out, Eleanor would find more than one way to frustrate her former husband. Not long after marrying Henry, she gave him a son, then another, and another. In total, Eleanor would bear 5 sons and 3 daughters. During the early years of their marriage, Henry seemed completely devoted to Eleanor. But as time went on, the king's affection began to cool. Mistresses appeared, followed by illegitimate children, and before long, rumours of Henry's affairs were spreading throughout the kingdom. Perhaps the most famous of these women was Rosamund Clifford, who may have been the mother of one of Henry's illegitimate sons, Geoffrey, the future Archbishop of York. Gossips whispered that Geoffrey was the king's favourite child, and some even claimed that Henry intended to make him his heir, divorce Eleanor and marry Rosamund instead. And so a famous legend was born, one that would live on for centuries in literature and art. According to the story, Eleanor found her way through a secret labyrinth to her rival's chambers, and offered her a choice between poison and a dagger as the means of her death. Rosamund supposedly chose the poison and died. It's a wonderfully dramatic tale, but like many medieval legends, it almost certainly isn't true. Although Eleanor did later help raise Geoffrey, she and Rosamund lived far from one another, and Rosamund herself died years after her relationship with Henry had ended. The truth is that the relationship between Eleanor and Henry really did fall apart. Eventually, they began living separately. By then, Eleanor was already in her mid-40s and had no intention of having more children. Instead, she withdrew to her own lands, where she focused on governing her territories, and honestly, their marriage might have continued limping along like that for years if it hadn't been for a major family crisis. The first blow came when Henry used some of Eleanor's lands as collateral without her permission. Then, in 1173, 3 of their eldest sons launched a full-scale rebellion against their father. For years, the princes had been frustrated by Henry's refusal to grant them more independence, titles, and real power. Many historians believe that Eleanor encouraged her sons to rise against him, hoping to finally bring down the husband who had betrayed and humiliated her. And let's not forget the family drama, because Louis was still very much part of the picture. As Princess Diana once famously said, there were 3 people in this marriage. By that point, Louis had become the father-in-law of one of Eleanor and Henry's sons, and he seems to have done everything he could to encourage the young prince's resentment toward his father. Whoever was truly behind the rebellion, the result was a long and bitter conflict. For years, Henry found himself fighting not foreign enemies, but his own sons. As for Eleanor, Henry considered her one of the chief instigators of the revolt. When she attempted to join her sons, she was captured and placed under house arrest. Of course, Henry understood that a queen of Eleanor's stature could not simply disappear. Whenever it suited him, he would bring her to important political ceremonies and public events. But the rest of the time, she was expected to remain confined in a series of isolated castles, living under constant supervision. Eleanor regained her freedom only after Henry's death, and honestly, you could say that this was when her second act truly began. Her son, Richard the Lionheart, admired and trusted his mother enormously. Unlike many rulers of the time, he actively relied on her judgment and experience. Eleanor was given an honoured position at court, and frequently acted as regent in Richard's absence. It was Eleanor who travelled across Europe to escort Richard's future wife to England, and it was Eleanor who later helped secure his release when he was captured on his way home from the Third Crusade, raising the enormous ransom that finally brought him back. By 1199, when Eleanor was nearly 80 years old, Richard died, and her youngest surviving son, John, became King of England. Her grandson Arthur attempted to overthrow her son John, and Eleanor personally took action against him. She led forces against Arthur's supporters, captured one of their strongholds, and was eventually seized and taken prisoner by Arthur himself. And honestly, I find that remarkable. Most people at her age would have been long retired from public life, yet Eleanor was still caught up in rebellions, sieges, and royal power struggles. The fact that she managed to live through adventures like these in her 80s is extraordinary in itself. After outliving most of her children, Eleanor began taking an increasingly active role in the lives of her grandchildren. Queen Victoria is often called the grandmother of Europe, but Eleanor of Aquitaine could just as easily be called the grandmother of medieval Europe. Through her descendants, her bloodline spread across countless royal houses, and even today, traces of Eleanor's lineage can be found in many European royal families. In 1200, already an elderly woman, even by modern standards, Eleanor embarked on yet another remarkable journey. Travelling to Spain on a diplomatic mission, she personally escorted her granddaughter Blanche of Castile back to France, where she arranged her marriage to the future King Louis VIII. The final years of Eleanor's life were spent in relative peace at Fontevraud Abbey. When she died on April 1st, 1204, she was 82 years old, an age that, by medieval standards, was almost unimaginable. She was buried at Fontevraud, alongside her husband Henry and her beloved son, Richard the Lionheart. And if you look closely, you'll notice that Eleanor's tomb is positioned slightly higher than her husband's. Do you think that's merely a coincidence? Or was it this remarkable woman's final act of defiance, one last way of reminding Henry who really had the upper hand in their marriage? The monks who commemorated her left behind a simple but powerful tribute. A queen who surpassed almost all the queens of the world. I don't know whether Eleanor of Aquitaine can truly be called the greatest queen in history. There have been many remarkable queens, and comparing women who lived centuries apart is never easy. But what I do know is that there was nothing ordinary about her. Her entire life was spent pushing against the limits that society tried to place on her. In a world where women were so often expected to remain in the shadows of men, Eleanor insisted on being heard. She was a queen, a rebel, a diplomat, a patron of culture, a prisoner, and a political force to be reckoned with until the very end of her life. So, if it had been up to me to choose the inscription on her tomb, I might have gone with something a little simpler than the monks did. Badass queen. What would you have called Eleanor of Aquitaine? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.